very warm welcome to another episode in our Doorway to Sindh webinar series, presented by Sindhi Culture Foundation and the Embassy Group, providing you a glimpse of Sindhi history and culture. Many of us would have heard the word Sindhwork. In this episode, let us take a look at what is Sindhwork and who are the Sindhworkis and their legacy. Dr. Subhadra Anand will be in conversation with Professor Mark Anthony Falzon to give a glimpse into Sindhwork and Sindhworkis. I now request Ms. Trisha Lalchandani to continue.
Hi, everybody. I'm here to moderate the discussion between Dr. Anand and Professor Falzon. I'm Trisha Lalchandani. I am pursuing my doctoral studies at EHESS Paris. My work is slightly closely associated with what we are talking about today. My work concerns the Hindu Sindhis in India and an aspect of their identity, particularly to do with religion. However, I'm also trying to understand the social classes that exist within the Sindhis, and Sindhworkis happen to be one of them. Let me introduce the speakers for today's talk first, and then we'll move on. We have with us Dr. Subhadra Anand, who was the principal of RD National College, Mumbai, and the CEO of the NGO Save the Children. She's the author of the book, The National Integration of Sindhis, published in 1996. She's also the managing trustee of the Jhulelal Tirth Dham in Narayan Sarovar, Kutch. We have with us also Professor Falzon, who is a social anthropologist with PhD from Cambridge in 2002. He's professor at the University of Malta and a life member of Clare Hall, Cambridge. Some of his publications include Cosmopolitan Connections, Oxford 2005, Multi-Sited Ethnography, Ashgate 2009, The Examined Life 2019, The University of Malta 2020, Birds of Passage, Bergen 2020, The Sindhis, Penguin 2022, and Fishes and Marine Invertebrates of the Maltese Islands 2021. With this, I hand over the floor to Dr. Anand, and perhaps we begin with the talk.
Thank you, Trisha, and welcome, Mark. And thank you, Aruna, for giving this wonderful opportunity. And I think your initiative of Doorway to Sindh has really opened the doors to Sindh, because what you are doing is an absolutely remarkable work, and one gets to know so much because you're putting together scholars from all over the world, people who have different perspectives and people who will be able to throw light like the way Mark has been doing, and he's so well read. I have read his Cosmopolitan Connections, and I was completely floored by the book, the kind of research that he has done. And it's my privilege, Mark, to be talking to you and to also, learning from you. I think more than anything else, there is a lot to learn from you, and I'm really looking forward to a very good session with you.
Thank you, Subhadra, and tell you it's an honor and a privilege for me to be talking to you, and also to thank Aruna and the Sindhi Culture Foundation for this tremendous privilege. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, today we are going to be talking about, or not really, discussing and getting to know more about this term, which is called Sindhwork. Now, while I was doing my research, I came across 2 or 3 very interesting things about Sindhwork. And that was that where has this term Sindhwork come about? It's, very, very strange that a particular trade or a trading community has got a tag of a country. It's like India work. So this Sindhwork is something that is very intriguing. And while I was reading, 2 things that came about was that what was it that was traded initially as far as Sindhwork is concerned. And one of the things that was very popular was the mirror work. Now, where did this mirror work come from? There was a very interesting story about Muslim girl who was in, in the desert, and she was embroidering a prayer cap for her fiance. When suddenly on the sand, she saw something shimmering. And when she looked, it was a piece of mica. And she was so fascinated with that piece of mica that she took it up and she incorporated it into the cap. And then more mica pieces were incorporated. And that is how the mirror work started, which was very much the essential part of the initial trade as far as Sindh work is concerned. And where has this work, Sindh work, come about? This is basically traders who were going from one place to another place, especially in European quarters, trying to sell their wares. And that is where, and they would take everything from the artisans in Hyderabad, who were very, very skilled artisans. And they would go to these headquarters, European headquarters, and from there, the European women would say, is this Sindh work? And then they would, so Sindh work had a very strong stamp on it that these are the products that would be good products. But now we find, and we'd like this from you as a big narrative as to how from a small Hyderabad productions, this has grown internationally in such a big way, having all kinds of colors and having all kinds of trades and goods, etc., that is coming under what is known as the Sindh work. So my question to you, Mark, is why Hyderabad? Like we know that why Shikarpur? The same thing, why Hyderabad? Why was it that the Sindh work has originated in Hyderabad? And from there, we'd really like you to throw light on this fascinating journey of how the Sindhworkis from Hyderabad have gone all over the globe. So much so that Indira Gandhi went to Alaska, and there also she met a Sindhi trader. So why they are in every part of the globe, maybe over 100 countries. So how did this happen? It's a fascinating thing, a journey that you are very well versed with and you have covered. So we'd be really interested. And without interruption from me, I'd like to have this inspiration from you.
First of all, thank you for making my day with that very romantic story about the mirror work. I had no idea.
Okay.
The first time. Lovely, a very lovely story. So the problem is where to begin, really. Let's why Hyderabad? I think that's the useful question, really. Why Hyderabad? First of all, there was a distinction at why Hyderabad in the roughly the mid-19th century, because as far as we know, that's when Sindh work really took off. As you rightly say, Sindh work, originally it meant a type of production, the work of Sindh, but then the word was adapted. No, it was transposed to mean the people who sold those works became known as Sindhworkis, the people who peddled, who sold Sindh work. So Hyderabad, mid-19th century, that's where we have to travel to. First of all, at the time, there was quite a distinction or a set of distinctions between lower and upper Sindh. Upper Sindh was, in terms of trade, synonymous primarily with the Shikarpuri moneylenders. On the other hand, in the second part of the 18th century, Lower Sindh had emerged as a trading or a set of trading centers in its own right, including what became Karachi eventually, and of course Hyderabad. Hyderabad itself was founded in 1769, And it became the capital of the Talpur Mirs, because originally it was associated with the Kalhoras, no? And then the Talpurs took over from the Kalhora dynasty and established it as their capital in 1782. So that's when that's where our story really begins. By the mid 19th century, what we find in Hyderabad is a class, a community of Banyas, of traders, of business people, Hindus. Most of the trade in Hyderabad, as elsewhere in Sindh, was in the hands of Hindus. There was a division of labor in this sense. What were they trading in? Of course, there were many different kinds of trade and many different levels of merchants. Some were big merchants who had warehouses in Karachi, for example, and warehouses in Hyderabad and so on. But part of the trade was also the handicrafts of Sindh, of the region, or importing things, selling to whom? Among others, to the elites of Hyderabad, of Sindh, the Talpur court, for example. You know, courts have enormous appetites for luxury, for goods. And the Hyderabadi traders, not Sindhworkis at this point, Sindhwork was unknown. They were just local traders, some of them more than local, with connections in Karachi and occasionally also via Karachi to Bombay and so on. But this was a small. What happened in the mid-19th century was absolutely incredible. We don't have all the answers, but the British annexed Sindh in 1843. The British annexed Sindh in 1843. And of course, the Talpur Mirs were deposed, so that was the court of the Mirs gone. With it, a set of the disruptions that always follow, that always come in the wake of these regime changes. One of these disruptions was the disruption of markets, essentially. The traders, the Banyas of Hyderabad, found that their traditional, I have to watch the word traditional a bit, I don't mean timeless, but their established markets were suddenly gone or severely disrupted. There were other changes as well. Generally, historians seem to agree that the mid-late 19th century was a time of great disruption for moneylenders, traders, merchants in Sindh generally. One of the reasons is probably that they had increasing competition from incoming traders from other places as a result of the regime change. So there were a number of reasons why. What really concerns us, I think, is, this is of course a short discussion, what really concerns us is the outcome. The outcome was that the Hyderabadi Banyas, or some of them, decided to do some lateral thinking. No, but things are not working directly in Hyderabad. Why not look elsewhere? And elsewhere was primarily Bombay, and via Bombay, outside of Sindh and outside of the region. Now, why? Why did they do this? And why did they? I think we always have to leave rooms for some contingency. Sometimes, you know, chance is part of history as well. So you cannot always find a list you cannot always come up with a list of specific reasons. But what we know is that there were these changes and that directly or indirectly, as a result of these changes, the Hyderabadis decided to look elsewhere. Now, when I say the Hyderabadis, we have to mention another word, which of course all of you are very familiar with, Baibans. No, Baibans, many of us have translated as brotherhood. Brotherhood. Was Baiban a caste? It was certainly a type that differentiated itself, and that over time became synonymous with a kind of mobile, especially business. So the Baibans of Hyderabad, because there were other Hindu Sindhi groups in Hyderabad, there were the Amals, for example, and many, many other groups. But the Baibans were the people, for the most part, they were the people who really looked abroad for opportunities. Now, these were traders. These were not money lenders like the Shikarpuris. They were traders. So the trade, their business consisted in buying and selling, trading, essentially. Where would they move to? The evidence suggests that their first destination or set of destinations was in fact the Mediterranean. Claude Markowitz has evidence for this. I found my own evidence for this in Malta and other places. Haller has evidence for this in Gibraltar and so on. All the evidence suggests that the first destination was in fact the Mediterranean. And there is a bit of a clue in this, because it also tells us something about what Sindh work was. The reason why they moved to the Mediterranean was because of the intrinsic qualities of Sindh. We're talking about original Sindh work now, the mid-19th century Sindh work, the works of Sindh, the crafts of Sindh. As you rightly point out, Subhadra, there was a long history of appreciation of these crafts. As far back as the 1630s, we have an account of someone who wrote that the works of Sindha, as he put it, the works of Sindha were without a parallel. So they had a reputation. What works? The mirror work that you mentioned, textiles. There was also pottery, glazed pottery in Hala, for example, was an important center of production earlier. Tatta was an important center of production. And then there was also lacquer work. How do we know this? We have examples of this. If you go to the Victoria and Albert Museum, actually you don't have to go because now all the collections are online. Although, of course, there is a certain tactile pleasure in actually seeing, or maybe if you're lucky, handling the object. But the Victoria and Albert Museum has a small collection of handcrafts of Sindh from the mid-19th century. And they all suggest that these were made for foreign consumption, essentially. These were not things that were meant to be used locally, but they were meant to be sold as curiosities that were reminiscent of the region, that suggested Sindh, essentially. That's why Sindh works. Now, why the Mediterranean? Because, of course, the Mediterranean was one of the watering holes of empire, essentially. A second ago, I said that the British annexation brought with it a set of disruptions. But it also brought with it a set of opportunities. Increased shipping, for example, better over time, because at first there was disruption in that respect as well. But very, very quickly, the Sindhis found themselves better connected, especially through Karachi and Bombay, and then via Bombay to places like the Mediterranean. Bombay and the Mediterranean are far away, but actually they were part of an itinerary in the cartography of empire at the time, and especially after the opening of the Suez Canal completed in 1870, I think, and opened and first used in 71, if plus or minus a year or two. So the Mediterranean was part of this cartography of empire. And what was so special about the Mediterranean, among other places? But the Mediterranean was a good example. Alexandria, Gibraltar, Malta, which is where also I come into the picture, because that's how I got interested in Sindhis, as you know. These were maritime towns, maritime cities, essentially. What mattered to the British was not the hinterland in most cases. It was a port city. This is what mattered to the British. Trade, long distance trade. The British had no interest in Malta as a country. They had a huge interest in the port of Malta, the harbor of Malta, likewise Gibraltar, likewise Alexandria, and so on. So here, the Sindhis found a string, not just one opportunity, but a string of connected opportunities, lines of shipping that connected Gibraltar to Malta, to Alexandria, sometimes to other ports in the middle. If you read travelers' accounts of the 19th century, you find that they always stop in the same places pretty much and describe the same thing in much the same ways. It's fascinating, actually. And the Sindhis found that these Hyderabadi Bybans discovered that if they went on board a ship in harbor in Malta with their box or sack or whatever it was, in many cases, in the beginning, these were peddlers. They were small, you know, we didn't have K. Chelaram just like that. It took time for the firms to develop. They would show these wares to the travelers and tell them, these are the wares of Sindh. This is Sindhwork. No? You can almost hear them actually peddling them. There was a lot of competition because there would have been people peddling wares from various parts of the world, actually. And the Sindhis did their bit. These are the Sindhworks. Now, how did these travelers know about Sindhworks? Partly because of a long-term reputation, a well-rooted reputation, but also because the late 19th century was a time of exchange of knowledge about these regional specialities. Think of the international exhibitions, for example. The international exhibitions, 1871, a very, very big one in Paris and London. At these international exhibitions, these were people from all different places. Of course, we always have to factor in the colonial imaginary here, but whatever. People from different parts of empire, from different parts of the known world, would bring the best of what they produced to these exhibitions, and knowledge would therefore be circulated. So the typical British traveler, in stopping for a couple of hours sometimes in Malta in 1870, and a Sindhworki, boards the ship for a few minutes with his sack or his chest full of Sindhworks, they would know about these and they would be prepared to buy them in many cases. So the Sindhworkis, that's why the name Sindhwork was so important, because it was a pitch, no? It was a sales pitch. These are the works of Sindh. We are in the second half of the 19th century. The first evidence I have of Sindhworkis in Malta is from 1867. In 1867, someone called, I think Bojumal, but I'm not sure now. I think Bojumal applied for permission to import and sell in Malta decorative ornamental knives, daggers, and other items of Indian Sindhi manufacture. So that's the first example I have. That's the first evidence I have from Malta, 1868. We are somewhere there, somewhere in that region. of course, the Sindhis didn't just move to the Mediterranean, because British trade, British shipping was not restricted to the Mediterranean. Of course, there was the eastern route, and then on to South America, and it's not a terribly long story in terms of time, because we're talking about a couple of decades really, but it's a very long story in terms of the intricacies of it. But to cut a long story short, before long, Sindhworkis were established in little pockets. Remember, all of them, or most of them, Hyderabadi Baibans, which restricted them a bit, because Hyderabad was not a huge place. It was a very, very tight network. They were dealing mostly in the same lines, drawing on the same labor pool, no? Drawing on the same knowledge bases. So these Hyderabadi Baibans, by the 1870s, 1880s, we find them in small pockets, sometimes itinerant as well, along the main shipping routes. That is part of the story. Had it stopped there, they would probably be a colorful footnote of history.
Yes.
But this is where I think I told you once, I don't believe in such a thing as a Sindhi miracle, but certainly I think you'd be hard pressed not to concede that there is such a thing as Sindhi entrepreneurship and you know. What the Sindhworkis did was, while they still call themselves Sindhworkis, they stopped limiting themselves to the works of Sindh, because had they done so, the diaspora, the trade would have fizzled out, because this was a very small, very specialized sector. But what they did was they explored new markets. They didn't just explore new markets, they developed new ones. They created new ones. Let me give you a tangible example. One I know well because it's close to home. Maltese lace. In tourists who come to Malta, one of the things that many of them take back home is Maltese lace. But Maltese lace has a long history, especially in the, I think, late 1870s. Queen Victoria took a liking to Maltese lace. There are even photos of Queen Victoria wearing Maltese lace and so on. And this was, of course, she was the main influencer of her time. I mean, if Queen Victoria liked Maltese lace and wore Maltese, everyone wanted Maltese lace. And the Sindhis actually
took that.
noticed this. And there were Sindhis in Malta selling Sindhwork. They hit on an idea. They said, why not sell Maltese lace, not in Malta, because there are a million people selling Maltese lace in Malta, but elsewhere. And I have evidence, I have records, archival records of Sindhis subcontracting the manufacture of Maltese lace in Malta and applying for permission to export Maltese lace to Java. To Batavia in Java. Why Java? Because, of course, of added value. Because in Malta, there were many shops selling Maltese lace. But if you could get your hands on Maltese lace in Java, you would pay a premium, because there weren't shops selling it. So a world traveler, keen to get their hands on little bits and pieces of these various provenances, I mean, they would pay a lot of money for a piece of Maltese lace in Batavia, which was also a harbor city. And there were Sindhis living there, who were the cousins of the Sindhis who were subcontracting the manufacture of lace in Malta. And I mean, there are so many examples of this. Silk is a much more important example. because by the late 19th century, Yokohama, for example, emerged as one of the key Sindhworki sites worldwide due to the export of silk. So Japanese silk was all the rage at the time because of Japonism, after the Meiji Restoration of 1868 in Japan, and then the 70s, the Japanese ports, they were opened to trade and so on. And there was a global craze with anything Japanese, basically. The British royal family were photographed wearing kimonos and sipping tea out of Japanese ceremony. And it was a global craze. Tissot, the painter, Madame Butterfly, the opera, Japonism it was called. Again, the Sindhis weren't going to let Japonism pass them by. So they realized that this was a great chance to make some money on Japanese silk. If you could export Japanese silk to other places around the world. And why were Sindhis so well located, so well placed to export Japanese silk? Because the Sindhis were not Japanese. Because they had moved there as Sindhworkis, probably peddling small goods originally. They had a little presence there. Before long, this little presence, there's a very good thesis by someone called Chugani, a Sindhi herself, of course. Before long, Sindhis flocked to Yokohama because this is a characteristic of Sindhis still today, to some extent. Whenever, or wherever I should say, an opportunity develops somewhere, you tend to find Sindhis flocking there for sometimes for a period of time, and then they move elsewhere. Now I'm generalizing because not all Sindhis are in this kind of business, but quite a few of them are. This is the legacy of Sindh work still today. In any case, Yokohama in the late 19th century, you suddenly have Sindhis from Hyderabad, from other places around the world, moving to Yokohama to export silk, and in turn, Sindhis in other places importing silk from Yokohama and selling it locally, or perhaps selling it on and so on. So, I mean, and these are just two examples. One was a very small example of Maltese lace, and silk was, of course, a much more important examples. These were still known as Sindhworkis, but there's nothing Sindh work about Maltese lace or Japanese silk. So Sindh work essentially was a term that survived. There was life after death, if you know what I mean, for the word Sindh work. Now, even after Sindh works had receded into memory, Sindhworkis were actually still calling themselves Sindhworkis and plying this new trade. So what we have here is a number of things. First of all, this is a network, a diaspora, and I'm not using the word diaspora loosely here. I think until partition, certainly we can absolutely speak in terms of a Sindhworki diaspora, trade diaspora, because it is strongly centered in Hyderabad, strongly. Actually, you could probably narrow it down a bit. Apparently, most Sindhworki Bhaibans lived in Hirabad, which is a neighborhood now of Hyderabad. So strongly centered in Hyderabad, and a few streets where they had their paddies, their headquarters, so to speak. So this was one thing, a strong center. Labor was recruited very often in Hyderabad through family connections, through in various ways. Mostly Bhaibans, not exclusively, but certainly in the early stages of Sindh work, recruitment was mostly Bhaiban boys who would sometimes quite young, teenagers, who would be sent off to the various branches. Originally, the firms were run very much, sorry, not the firms, the businesses were run very much on the Shah Gumashta model, working partners, which again facilitates mobility because you can have working partners that are separated geographically, sometimes over large distances. But eventually, certainly by the early years of the 20th century, we find firms developing, strong firms with a very, for the time, modern form of organization, with salaried employees rather than working partners, rather than agents. They were employing Baiband boys, by boys I mean young men, right, as salaried employees. Of course, therefore, the hierarchy between the big Sindhworki bosses sitting in Hyderabad and employing these hundreds sometimes for the very big companies of boys, and the salaried employees was huge. They were all Sindhworkis, but not all Sindhworkis were created equal. I mean, but there was there was hierarchy within the Sindhworki network. Why should it be egalitarian? But you know what I mean. It was this was not one big happy family. That's what I'm trying to say. So they were recruited in Hyderabad. There was a very clear structure of contracts, formal contracts, sometimes as well, in writing. And Baiband boys would be sent off as employees, usually for, I think, 2.5 years, if I'm not mistaken. 2.5, I've written it down somewhere, but the details now escape me. 2.5 years. And then they would go back to Hyderabad for a short period of time, maybe to get married. So we have the development of these firms. Some firms were pretty huge. In fact, even today among Sindhis, especially among older Sindhis, sometimes they refer to the 3 Cs, they say. The 3 Cs. The 3 Cs were in the early 20th century. They were the 3 main Sindhwork companies: Choitram, Chelaram, and Chandrai. No? These all had their own Sindhi surnames. For example, Chandrai are Uttam Chandani, I think. Uttam Chandani. Because, you know, the names change. The Harilelas, for example, of Hong Kong are actually Mir Chandanis. Chelaram, I can't remember his name now, but anyway, it's irrelevant. But there is always the proper sort of the 3 Cs: Chelaram, Choitram, and Chandrai. These are still exist today. Yes, they of course they still exist today. There were other firms. Udhavadas, for example, was a very important firm. Tahilram. Now, some of these firms over time broke up and disappeared. For example, Udhavadas, from what we know, was a casualty of the depression of the 1930s. Many Sindhi firms had problems in the 1930s for obvious reasons, no? Because consumption dropped really, especially in the lines. They weren't selling staples really for the most part. Now another thing we need to say. So a strong network based in Hyderabad. How about the profits? What sort of money are we talking about here? All indications suggest that the profits were huge, especially around the late 19th, early 20th century. Huge profits. The big companies were making stacks of cash. And here I know that the Sindhi culture people in the Sindhi Culture Foundation are very interested in this. It also transformed to some extent the face of Hyderabad as a town, because this was their center. This was the heart of their social life, where families were, and so on. So they were also investing money in Hyderabad. And you had these huge flows of cash and wealth into Hyderabad and being transformed into things like Havelis, for example, right? Sometimes into public works, public charities as well. So this was another aspect of Sindh work in the late 19th, early 20th century. That this huge profit and the conversion of this profit into works in Hyderabad, and into the center, sorry, of the diaspora in Hyderabad. As I said, what we find is that by the early 20th century, in most cases, these are firms. They are firms, not anymore the old Shah-Gumashta system, but they're firms. By partition, before partition, therefore, what we find is a worldwide, and I'm not exaggerating, you mentioned Alaska, Subhadra. I'm not sure, I don't know. I mean, Sindhis are fond of joking about this.
In Alaska. Mark, I found them in Alaska.
You did? Oh, okay. So you have first.
There was this store owned by Sindhis at the port itself. Yeah.
What were they selling?
No, they were selling all kinds of things like jackets, woolens, and all that.
Of course, when in Alaska.
Yes. It was a store, basically clothes store. So this clothes and shoes, whatever you need in the cold climate of Alaska.
It's no use selling them glazed pottery from Hala.
No. So what was the need? Need-based selling was there.
Absolutely. So yes, so this is a worldwide diaspora now. But by now, I mean, by the time of partition, by before partition. And this only took, what, 50, 60, 70 years to happen?
Can I interrupt you over here for a little bit? I'd like to just add something as to, you said that these big firms, they got youngsters from Hyderabad and they employed them, they gave them high salaries, and they brought them from Hyderabad because they're, from close relatives and all that. But there also we find the growth has taken place because there have been many instances where these youngsters, they have had enough experience and they have opened their own business.
That is a really crucial chapter because what happened was that these businesses, they spread, they diversified, as I said earlier, exploring new markets and so on, but they also multiplied. There was an element of fission here, no fission. And this is a characteristic, probably still today actually, a characteristic of this kind of mobile Sindhi business. As you very rightly say, these boys were employed, not all of them, but some of, by the way, not all were given very good salaries. I mean, there were a lot of, there were many disputes and
many were not given.
And the conditions were not always good. I mean, the low-level Sindhworki employees who were themselves migrants had to, sometime, not always, there were, like in any group, there were good employers and not so good employers. So some of them had to endure quite harsh conditions. Yes. Among them, of course, because mobility is easy to say, but when you live it, you're far away from home, in a very, I mean, there was no internet at the time. There was no Indian food everywhere. I mean, you couldn't just go to have a curry in Malta, forget it. I mean, you had to eat whatever was available.
We depended on the political situations at
Of
that
course,
time.
absolutely. In Gibraltar, for example, Gibraltar, Sindhworkis had to deal with a very difficult set of political circumstances that restricted migration and restricted also restricted the movement, the free movement of women of Sindhi women to Gibraltar. So there were, I mean, endless difficulties, and also, you know, you have to keep in mind that also the how shall I put it, the emotional part of this as well, to be so far away from home, very vulnerable to the whims of your employer.
As well as the political conditions, because this is the time that we know that lot of countries are going through political turbulence, and there are these military coup d'etats, civil wars, etc. And where the Sindhis and the shopkeepers had become victims of
Absolutely. I think, in fact, Subhadra, that's one of the reasons why, at least in the early phase, they tended to limit themselves to British places. They sort of made the best of what used to be a Pax Britannica, no? Because if they limited themselves, that we're talking about the relatively early phase of Sindhwork here, because but if they found that if they limited themselves to British places, and there was no shortage of them, of course, it's just the empire on which the sun never set, no? Someone once said, the empire on which the blood never dried.
yes.
But there are two sides of the same coin, I suppose. I am an ex-colonized as you are. So they limited themselves to British places, partly because precisely because of what you mentioned, and of course, then much later with decolonization and places like Africa, for example, Sindhworkis in Africa faced tremendous problems in the late 60s and the early 70s. But
many Sindhworkis in Africa.
Totally, and with Africanization, of course, in the late Uganda and so on, they had big problems. In fact, people I spoke to, Sindhworkis I spoke to, told me, why do you speak of partition in the singular? They said, we've experienced many partitions, actually. And I know what they meant. They weren't, they weren't saying that partition was as nothing, but they actually lived through many other huge political changes that forced them to actually uproot and lead.
There were a lot of uproot.
Because again, we have to keep in mind that we're talking here about many decades. So there were Sindhis who were actually born in these places. So these places became almost like home to them. So if you're born in East Africa, as a Sindhi, East Africa was your home. So effectively, when you had to uproot in the late 60s, you were uprooting from a place that you called home. Although you knew you were a Sindhworki and India was you, but that's where you grew up. That's where your memories were and so on. I'm trying to not to, what I'm doing, I'm trying not to downplay the practical, personal difficulties of mobility. Because it's sort of fashionable to talk about mobility and the world is my backyard and all that, but mobility has its costs. And in fact, we often find in literature that mobility is almost like a curse.
Absolutely.
In the Odyssey, for example, Odysseus, the one thing that Odysseus wanted was to go back home to his wife.
Yeah.
But he was cursed by the gods to be constantly on the move.
On the move.
So mobility has its tremendous human costs as well. And when we talk about the mobile Sindhis, we shouldn't sort of forget that part of the, but in any case. So here we are before partition, diaspora still centered in Hyderabad. For the most part, it's men moving. The women are in Hyderabad with some exceptions, but for the most part, it's the men moving. The women were living in joint families in Hyderabad, functional families in Hyderabad, and a worldwide diaspora. And then partition happens. Partition. Now, when you talk to Sindhis today, especially to Sindhworkis, they say partition to us wasn't very difficult.
Because they already had,
Because we already had business in Gibraltar, and we had shops and so on. But again, let us not downplay the difficulty of, first of all, they had investments in Hyderabad, not just financial and material, but first of all, some things you can't move. A Haveli, for example, you cannot move. You have to leave it there. And if it's an ancestral home, if it's an ancestral Haveli, which successive generations have lived in and invested in and lived and died in, then it's not just something you leave behind. But also, Hyderabad was their landscape of belonging, if you will. It was the center of the diaspora. But at partition, they had to leave. And the Sindhworkis most of them ended up in their different
places.
Yes. So in Malta, for example, at partition, what we had was suddenly an influx of women from Sindh, from Hyderabad. This was very, very, very difficult for these women, especially at first, because at least the men had been brought up feeling that they were mobile and that they would move and so on. The women weren't. For the women, Hyderabad was home and a stable home. So they were uprooted from that, and they ended up living in a flat somewhere in the suburb of Valletta in Malta, in a place which, some of them, they didn't speak English. They spoke only Sindhi. So there were real difficulties, but economically they survived, or most of them survived quite well, because they had their businesses here. They had a good source of income here. Now, so partition changed the Sindhwork diaspora socially, very fundamentally, because from a diaspora with a clear center, in many senses, you suddenly had a network. I think we can still call it a network of pockets of Sindhis in different places around the world. Now, were they disconnected pockets? Of course not. Of course not. They were still Sindhworkis at heart. So they were connected. How so? Marriage, for example, is a very, very important part, that aspect that kept these different groups of Sindhis around the world connected. The Sindhis the Sindhi women living in Malta today, for example, were all born elsewhere. Singapore, in Indonesia, I'm thinking of actual examples, I'm not making this up, 2 or 3 in India, anyway, many other places. From Panama. Marriage, was a very important part, that aspect that kept this network connected. Another thing was what I would like to think of as the emergence of Bombay as a kind of, at least, cultural heart of Sindhis. Sindh was gone. Hyderabad was gone. But Bombay emerged over time as a kind of, it's not exactly a substitute, but in some ways it did serve as a substitute. So there could be an annual pilgrimage if you are doing well as a Sindhi business person in wherever. You could maybe once a year afford a trip to Bombay to eat Sindhi sweets, to meet other Sindhis, going there to attend a few weddings and so on. So it served as a social heart of the Sindhwork diaspora. Another thing that kept the diaspora, the network, I should say, connected was mobility of labor. Because, and this is still going on.
Yeah.
It's not as strong, I think, as it used to be, but it's still going on. Young Sindhis, anyway, Sindhwork. Now, here we have to explain it, because why am I still using the word Sindhwork to talk about Sindhis living in the 21st century? Because the Sindhwork diaspora is no more.
Yes, but
this is a complicated thing. But to sum it up in a few words, I use it because Sindhis themselves use it. First of all, and I'm an anthropologist, so I have to be loyal to my informants. When they use it, they mean Sindhworkis. They're talking about people who draw on family legacies of Sindhwork. So even if they're not Sindhworkis themselves, for example, I once knew someone who was an industrial chemist, very, very, very highly qualified. So absolutely not a Sindhworki, but her family were Sindhworkis. So she called herself a Sindhworki, but not because she was doing Sindhwork, but because she drew on that legacy of Sindhwork. So Sindhwork today means two things, a kind of amalgam of two things. On the one hand, family legacies. On the other hand, a type of business. Because not all Sindhis do the Sindhwork type of business. Sindhis in Ulasnagar, for example, the pockets, thousands we're talking. There are Sindhis selling in the bazaar in Jaipur, for example. There are Sindhis specialized in electronics in Gujarat. All over India, as you know much better than I do. There are groups, pockets of Sindhis, but they are not doing the Sindhwork type of business. This is not to lessen what they're doing, but they are doing a different, the principles are different. It's not based on mobility, on exploration, on moving around. It's based on located business. Nothing wrong about that. It's a different kind of business. So Sindhwork today means a convergence of these two things, as I understand it: family legacy and a type of long-distance mobile business.
Yes.
So that's why Sindhis today, if you happen to be in Mumbai today at a bar or something and meeting Sindhis, as I did sometimes to do my fever, and someone walks in and orders drinks for everyone.
Yes.
And someone might say, of course, he's a big Sindhworki. A big Sindhworki means someone who has a strong legacy of Sindhwork in the family, and also someone who probably has businesses in 2, 3, 4, maybe 20 places around the world. Of course, not all big Sindhi business people are Sindhworkis. The Hindujas, for example, who have as many billions as doesn't really matter, are Shikapuris.
Yeah, basically.
They are not Sindhworkis. But Sindhworkis are the very prominent type of business people. So these three things, the emergence of India, and especially I think Mumbai Bombay and then Mumbai as the center of the mobility of labor, because I met many men in India who were doing Sindh work, were in Sindh work, but who had started out, who weren't necessarily Hyderabadi Bhaibands, by the way. Many of them weren't, in fact. And who had started out in 1960 or 1970 or 1980 as employees of the big Sindhworki firms. But eventually they set up on their own, because this is,
Absolutely.
I don't want to generalize here, and I certainly don't want to create stereotypes, but I think it's fair to say that certainly in this historical period that we are talking about, the tendency for employees to set up on their own has been and is a strong characteristic of Sindhi business. I think it,
Yes.
I've come across so many examples of this. For example, someone told me once, it's great to employ a Sindhi, but you pay the price. And what he meant was, the price was that person would set up on their own and 9 times out of 10 compete in exactly the same line. So
I'd just like to give you an example over here. It's from my own family. Mark, I am a Saraswat Brahmin. Okay. So we have nothing to do with business or anything. We are basically educationists. Okay.
I know.
And my mother's side, there are, following the traditional occupation of priestly class. Now, these people, they go to their jajmans. Jajmans are Bhaibans and Amils who employ them to conduct pujas, rituals and all that. Now they go to them, and from there they get to know that somebody is needed, maybe in Nigeria, or somebody needed in Kenya. So they, from our community, now this is the Saraswat Brahmin community, from our community, many boys have gone to Liberia, to Ghana, to Congo, and they went as employees, but they all diversified, and now they have become owners of big businesses over here, making money.
That is such a good, sum up of this mobility that we're talking about, and this networking of Sindhworkis. Yeah. So through the Brahmin,
because there's no longer Bhaiband who is setting it up. It is basically a Brahmin who has taken piggy-ridden a Bhaiband and has set up, owned this thing. And similar is the story of so many Amils who have gone and established businesses, etc. Gone as people who are just employees and have expanded over there. They also look at the opportunities. So you're right, look at this mobility that is there, which is not stratified completely, but is open. And of course, anybody will say, don't employ a Sindhi because he will go and do it. But that is the reality. That is the reality.
Absolutely. And this is, I think, one of the legacies of Sindh work, because, the topic is Sindh work. And I think, because Sindh work, although Sindh work itself is a distant memory, I think among Sindhis, it has actually left a very, very strong legacy. And the legacy is this mindset, essentially, of expansion, of employing Sindhis and paying the price, as it were, and also the diversification of lines, because this was the essence of Sindh work.
Absolutely.
Sindh work in the late 19th century, early 20th century, was these 3 things. And this, to some extent, this way of doing business has been grafted onto other kinds of Sindhis, other types of Sindhis who are not necessarily Sindhworkis. But you're completely right on how among the Sindhwork network information flows. Marriage as well. And when I did my fieldwork, I did visit the marriage bureaus, you know, in Mumbai. I remember going to quite a few, actually. Of course, I had a problem because I was younger at the time and people thought I was looking for a Sindhi girl.
Didn't find any.
I'd say, oh, no, I'm just an anthropologist. I come honorably. And
I wonder you didn't find anyone, huh?
I was looking for. I mean, I was doing field work. You know, for once, I was taking life seriously. And in these marriage bureaus, there was a lot of circulation of this information. Just the information you're saying. It wasn't just about who was marrying who. It was there's a, you know, the big Sindhis in Sindh Martin are doing quite well, actually. I know someone who's looking for someone to employ because the business is growing. Again, this is fantastic because the differences between Hyderabad in 1845 and Singapore in 2022 are, you know, they are two different worlds entirely. But somehow you find, I wouldn't want to say it exactly the same, but there is continuity. And this is the Sindhwork diaspora. The Sindhwork, from this tiny beginning, has developed into this. Another thing which I should certainly at least mention, I can't go into too much detail, but at least mention is diversification, because
yes,
although Sindhis are synonymous with trade, but they haven't been too reluctant to go into industry. There are many examples of Sindhis who have gone into industry, actually. We mentioned the Hindujas. They're, of course, a good example. But, of course, the Hindujas have diversified into pretty much everything. But in Malaysia, for example, in Malaysia, you find Sindhis who are diversifying into a number of fields, you know, companies like Valera and so on. In Hong Kong, the Hari Lelas, hotels, or tailoring, originally manufacturing, and then hotels. Yeah. So trade as in small manufacture. And then the Chanrais, one of the original 3 Cs, the Chanrais, Uttam Chandanis. The Chanrais are very big in Africa. Not incidentally, the company has now different branches, because this is another aspect of Sindhworki firms. Historically, they have tended to branch out, and one of the branches of Chanrai, I think Kevalram Chanrai, are very much into manufacture of things like palm residue and so on, in Africa and in other places as well, Malaysia as well. So Sindhis and so Sindhworkis, although historically associated with a sack full of Hala pottery or whatever, have shown no reluctance to diversify into things as diverse as industry as well.
The big thing. They have diversified in electronics.
No, absolutely.
It's fascinating, and it's amazing. It's amazing because
I think so, certainly.
Yeah, because from where, and I think that is where, like I've written in my book also, the history of Sindh has equipped Sindhis to be tough, resourceful, resilience, and taking the opportunity and moving on. Of course, there are a lot of stereotypes as far as Sindhis are concerned, as far as their business ethics is concerned and things like that. But at the end of it, what one sees is that there is a prosperity, that you never have Sindhis in a class where they are begging or anything like that. They are self-sufficient.
To say that Sindhis are always successful would be to do them a disservice, actually. And the history of Sindhwork is also the history of failed businesses and businesses that went under and so on. But, you know, if you said all Sindhworkis have always done well in whatever circumstances, that would be banalizing their hard work, really.
Oh, they've gone through tough times. It's not easy, like you said, living so far.
And some of them just weren't good at business. I mean, you know, there is no gene for business.
Uncertainties and
You know.
facing uprootment every now and then is something that is absolutely. Yeah. So of course, when we look at the post-partition period, there is a complete breakup or breakdown of the original occupational classes, and you have overlapping as far as opportunities are concerned, because India had different kind of opportunities and people have got into trade, etc. But like you rightly say, that Sindhworki is a Sindhworki, because it has those people who have set up empires, business empires outside of the country are considered as Sindhworkis, because they have left their land and they have gone into various places.
So the word still means something specific today. When you talk to Sindhis and they say Sindhworki, you can actually put your finger on what they mean. I think that's my opinion, anyway, at least.
Yeah. But one question is that I'd like to ask you is that Hyderabad had Hindu population as well as Muslim population, and we know that all the work, the Sindh work, basically was done by the Muslims.
Absolutely.
Artisans who have done it. So I have always been intrigued, and I have not been able to find answers to, is that how come Muslims did not take on what is known as Sindhworki business from their own artisans, pick it up, go and sell and all that? Why is it that there was such a distinct thing that the Muslims are creating and the Hindus are selling? Why couldn't the Muslims also sell? Why couldn't they also cross the land? Because Islam doesn't forbid you to cross.
No.
Hinduism used to forbid, because caste system was there. You can't cross. Of course, to Sindhis that didn't matter because they're not rigid caste systems there. But I would like to seek an answer over here. How come the Muslims did not? Because Arabs used to be, ancient times, they were.
Of course.
That everything we know, that the empires that have come up, which are the Islamic empires. How come the Sindhi Muslims had such a frog in the well attitude, or have I missed out something and I don't know about?
No, I don't think it was a frog. I mean, I cannot answer the question why, because I suppose this is, as I said earlier, one of the chances of history. I mean, why did the Hindus decide to go to Alexandria? They could have, I don't know, tried their hand at whatever, or move to India. So it's one of those, because it happened, But on the other hand, that's sort of part of the answer. But we can understand, I think.
Able to understand why the Muslims did not.
Yes, I think given the circumstances of Sindh at the time, the reason why Muslims did not go into Sindh work themselves was that it was the Hindus who were trading and the Muslims were doing other things. Now, why that is, there is no answer, I think, for that. At least I have not. There's not. It's division of labor. I mean, you can describe it, but you can't exactly say
Hindus saw, but Muslims didn't see. This is where what is intriguing.
Well, they saw other things. I mean, you could ask the question in reverse: why weren't the Hindus producing glazed pottery?
Because all that you need inherent skill, which the Muslims had. But
I'm sure the Hindus would have learned. I mean, this is, if they learned to do business in Yokohama, surely they could learn to make.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
And so, it's specialization, occupational specialization of labor. And I don't think the answer is to be found in timeless sort of truths about Islam and about Hinduism. Because as you say yourself, Subhadra, I mean, many Muslims in countless circumstances have been in fact long distance traders, and
Yes, they've been absolutely fantastic traders.
so it's not, I think I think people who argue that the reason is found in the Quran because the Quran has an injunction against riba, blah blah, I think that's not a really good answer.
God doesn't debar you from crossing the seas and.
No, I don't think so. In any case, I mean, I think, and I'm generalizing a bit here, but I don't think people, I have to be careful to say this, but look, people generally take the word of God seriously, but only to an extent, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
In the Gospels clearly say that give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. But
Yes.
if you speak to the Inland Revenue Department in Malta, a strongly Christian country, they will tell you that maybe most people missed that bit of the Gospels. No.
Yeah.
So you can't really make leaps from the text to social practice. And as I said, I think it's just a set of historical circumstances, but could it have been differently? Of course.
It
Of
could
course.
have.
Of
Maybe
course, totally. Because there was nothing to stop the
there
Muslims
is
from doing it.
research on that which has not come to us. So
Yeah, I mean, look, a clan of a brotherly of Hindus could have taken power and deposed the Talpur Mirs. But
they didn't have the military strength, no.
Yeah.
That is,
So you can describe it, but you can't say why they didn't do so.
they didn't have the military power.
I mean,
Yeah. So anything else, because it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. And
a pleasure for me, Subhadra, I assure you. And we've only scratched the surface of what Sindhwork is. But hopefully we've whet people's appetites to read more on Sindhworkis. There are many good books.
There are many, and there's so much to say,
There is a lot, there is.
Yeah, but I think, Mark, you've done a wonderful job of summarizing.
Thank you for the fantastic questions, Subhadra. Thank you.
In a beautiful way, and it's been so rewarding and so interesting listening to you. It's absolutely fascinating because the subject is also fascinating. So it's a combination of Mark, who is very knowledgeable, as well as the topic, which is very fascinating. So together, it has been quite a bonanza.
Thank you so much. This was such a fascinating session, such a comprehensive, extensive dialogue this has been. Thank you for taking us along this journey of the Sindhworkis. You addressed such interesting ideas and questions. In fact, at some point, there was this question in my mind about whether the phrase, whether the word Sindhworki is a frozen category or is it an expansive category, and the examples that Dr. Anand shared, and then of course Professor Falzon, everything that he said attests to the fact that it is an expansive category. People move in and out. Thank you so much for also highlighting the cultural aspect of the lives of the Sindhworkis. That's a crucial aspect. Again, something that I had been wondering about, and thank you for covering all of that. And of course, talking about mobility, and mobility is becoming one of those flippantly used words now.
Agreed, totally.
Anthropologists and historians, but thank you for bringing it down to the very to the very essentials of mobility, being away from home. The idea of cosmopolitanism is also very romanticized. It's
totally.
glamorized. Yeah, but there is a lot of dirty work that goes into the making of mobility and into people's mobilities
course.
and movements, right?
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, very much, Professor Falzon and
No,
Dr.
Mark, please, Tisha, Mark. I mean,
Mark and Dr. Anand, and of course Aruna for organizing this. And we'll see you for another session probably.
thank you so much, and I look forward tremendously to following this series.
अजब उतर पार दे ताड़े की तवार अजब उतर पार दे ताड़े की तवार हारन हर संभारा मुझा सरया त्या संकार अजब मुझे यार वसन गावे सकिया अजब उतर पार दे ओ अजब उतर पार दे ककर तो कार करे अजब उतर पार दे ककर तो कार करे वसे तो वड पुड़ियो कालक खंड भरे विजण निशान वरे मुझ सकार सुख दिए हो तो के सिंधड़ी सारे हो तो के सिंधड़ी सारे